Hi there, I'm Cynthia Dearin, and this is Business Beyond Borders, where I unlock the secrets of international business success. Today, I'm chatting to my colleague, Zach Person, who is a senior advisor to Dearin Associates and works closely with my team from his base in Chicago. Zach is an expert in sales and business strategy, and so today we're going to be chatting about the US market and why foreign companies often struggle to get traction there. Zach, welcome to the show. So Zach, it is May 2021. The US is just starting to emerge from the COVID pandemic. I understand that you have just gotten all your shots so you can get back out in the world. Give us a bit of an update about how things are looking in the US market at the moment.
It's roaring back. There is so much happening right now, especially here as vaccination rates are going up and businesses are opening up, and there's incredible opportunity right now. And the companies that get it right at this point in time are essentially potentially going to be the new market leaders in the next year or two or three if they play their cards right. And so there's a lot to be done, but it's also, you don't want to get too far too fast, because we don't know how long this upswing is going to last for. But above all, people are just absolutely trying at the bit to get out, to sell, to buy. People have piles of money right now, and there's just all kinds of stuff happening right now, and it's an exciting place to be exactly right now.
The United States is a holy grail market for businesses around the world, and for a lot of them it's the ultimate dream place to sell to. But what we see is that many foreign companies are surprised when they show up in the States and they find out that selling there is really different to what they're used to elsewhere. And so they struggle to get traction. Now, that's especially true in the B2B space. Wondering whether you could sort of start off by giving us an overview of B2B sales in the United States and how they work compared to elsewhere in the world.
With one word, magnitude. The market is so exponentially bigger than what most people have ever dealt with before. And you're dealing with, for example, Europe. You've got a bunch of different countries, but each country is in and of itself its own little market. But it's really difficult to look at Europe as a whole. But the United States, you can look at it as a whole, but you have regional differences. You got the South Coast, East Coast, West Coast, Midwest. And then inside of industries, there's different levels of distribution. There's different kinds of distribution. There's different kind of end users, and they all live in their different regions. And you have to pick a region and really knock it out of the park. And US companies do this. Is in the most successful companies, when they launch a product, they pick a region, a town, a city. They go to, say, Los Angeles or New York or Chicago or some area. Or even, I was talking with a company just last week at a trade show, and they just focus on the South because they come from the South. They speak the lingo, they have the accent, they have the connections, and the South tends to be very, very focused in and of themselves. And it's really important that you're from that region to sell to that region. And they don't go outside of those borders because they know how their world works, but it's hard to branch out to other places. So once they do well there, then you have to find another seed crystal individual to really break into another part of the country, another region, another place, and then build it out with a regional focus and hyper localized focus. And I think that, not being localized enough is a very big challenge.
So if you just had to talk about regional differences for a moment, to people, people outside the States know the United States through the movies, for example, but that is not the same as really understanding how somewhere works. Can you give us an example of how different the regions are one to another? Can you kind of paint a bit of a picture?
Yeah. So for example, if you go from the Midwest, where it's very open, it's a neutral English. And if you're in a bigger city, well, urban to suburban, and then also to rural, that's a big difference in this country. It's just like most places. But if you go down south, for example, there's a reason why the South tried to secede from the United States of America. The Civil War was very real, and that mentality still exists. They're much more down home. They're much more trying to keep it to themselves in their region. They're just very insular in that way, and they like it that way. And they're people coming from outside of their world, they'll kind of look at you a little bit sideways when you don't speak with their particular accent, you don't come from that part of the world, you have to work extra hard to get past that. And it's a cultural and a linguistic exercise in and of itself. And if you can't negotiate that cultural component or that headwind, you won't get very far. It'll be very difficult and you won't see the kind of success that you need. And you really have to find, and it just comes down to finding the right people who can be your brand ambassadors. And it can be your Rosetta Stone, where they understand the multilingual, multicultural, just they can at least have an open-minded enough to really wrap their head around the home office, but at the same time sell into the regional area. But for example, in this case, the Australian office has to hyper-localize. They have to take the advice of their local people. You can't copy and paste. If you copy and paste, you will fail, period, the end. And you have to take time to really, really make friends with the locals and build strategies on that kind of relationship.
Regional differences aside, tell me about some of the other key mistakes that you see companies making when it comes to doing sales in the US. What other things do people get wrong?
Well, the copy and paste conundrum is the number one issue. They'll be selling into Europe and or you only have so much marketing money to spend, so much time, so much investment to put into a campaign or a product or product offerings. And you try to create the one size fits all. And when you're trying to appease everybody, you appease nobody. And this is 100% true in this particular situation. You really have to commit to the market and create a message, create a product, create whatever the US market needs. You just have to do it because Americans don't care. Mm-hmm. They do not. If it doesn't speak to them in a meaningful way, it won't be successful. It'll be very difficult.
No point putting an ad with an Australian accent onto American social media, for example.
That's correct. And you got to find the people here that can help be your voice, literally.
It's interesting. I think it really is about focus in many ways. I was working with a client the other day that is taking a dental product into the United States market, and they were sitting with a bunch of investors, and the investors who've done a lot of work in the States before were saying to them, you've got to focus. If you only had $1 to spend on your marketing, what would you spend it on? And this was kind of the point that they were saying to this client, you've got to get focused and you've got to promote your stuff in a way that appeals to the market there.
Yep. And then, managing the people is the other side of it. When you find the right people and you bring them in and you give them the tools that they need and the leeway that they need to be able to create the content, the marketing collateral, whatever they need to do to really communicate the product features and benefits well. One of the pitfalls that I've seen happen quite often is that when you're dealing with Americans, it's amazing how much they don't know. And it's just people are as ignorant as their environments allow. In the United States, we don't have to know anything. We could spend our entire lives in our own backyard and do just fine for ourselves. We have that luxury. And any other place in the world, you go 50, 100 miles in any direction, you're speaking a different language, you got a different culture, you've got 1,000 different things that you have to localize if you ever want to be successful in that particular world. And people grow up understanding this complexity of the world. And then then you come to some place like the US where people don't have to be that way. And it's really hard not to condescend upon people that just don't get it, and you have to stop, you have to check the attitude at the door and just really meet people where they are and then help people understand in just a very matter of fact sort of a way. And you just have to give in, and whatever they need, you have to basically supply in terms of content and marketing collateral and messaging and all that kind of stuff. You just have to go with the flow more so here because people are not going to be flexible, unfortunately, in most cases. And you just have to be ready for that and just just flow and just let it happen. So it's a pitfall.
That prompts me to ask you another question. Give me your thoughts on two things. Let's talk firstly about sales style. How do you think people in the United States like to be sold to? Do you think that they prefer, because from the outside, it looks as though people are happy with a much more aggressive or much more forceful way of selling compared to some other parts of the world. Does that resonate with your experience?
Depends where you're calling. If you call New York, fast, fast, fast. You talk fast, you do fast. It's right in your face. It is really just no holds barred. They like it that way. That's how they grow up, and it's rough and tough, and it's just how it is. And if you don't come across that way, you'll be seen as kind of weak, and you just have to adapt. But if you try that approach in the South, which is much more laid back, it's much more relationship based. It's going from low context to high context culture is essentially what you're doing. And you have to then slow down literally how the way you speak. And if you can speak just a little bit Southern drawl, just adapt to their accent. That helps a lot. And just, how you doing? How are things going? It's about building the relationship. New York, they could care less. Let's get down to business and get this done. But you can't do that in the South.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing, and just being able to, and the West Coast is a little bit different. It's its own little animal. And you just kind of have to really sit and listen to how they're doing, and then mimic and mirror what they're doing. It's important to have the people to understand those differences, and that can either are from that region or can adapt to make the sale.
And what about marketing collateral? Is it, do you find that the marketing, the collateral that works is different region to region as well? Looking at it from somebody from the outside, my feeling about it is that marketing collateral in the States, again, is much more out there than in a country like Australia. The colors are louder, the fonts are bolder, the messages are much more straight to the point and much more directive than what we are used to or what we're comfortable here. Is that a correct way of looking at it, do you think? And is it the same across the country?
Totally. Well, in the United States, we're much more to the point. We are very informal, generally speaking. And I say, like with the Australians coming over here, it's still the old school way of where there's spoken English and there's written English. In the United States, we got rid of that a long time ago. It's spoken and written all the time. And, it's use contractions. The less is incredible, definitely more. And you don't have to say please and thank you all the time. You can just straight to the point and just, buy now, not please buy now, just buy now, man. Just get to the point. And that's how we roll. That's how we like it, because too much please and thank you and all of this, the more, some people would call it highbrow or whatever else. It just, to us, it feels, it's not genuine. Yeah, it just feels fake. It feels like that there's, okay, what's going on here? Instead of just straight to the point, that's just kind of how we've grown up.
Isn't that interesting? Because from the other side of it, people who are not from the States often feel like, wow, this is so pushy. They didn't say please or thank you, and they wrote their sales copy in like massive red letters, 100-point font that just kind of like scream at you out of the screen. So it's a very different kind of approach.
Yep. And it's difficult for the Brits as well, Australians as well, because it's coming from kind of the same STEM stuff. But but the funny thing is once letting it hang out is easier because that's how languages evolve. They become less and less formal over the course of time. And English, American English, is further down that continuum. And there's just, more. We use less words to get to the point, and we get taught that in school. I mean, I grew up, my mother was a legal professor, but she would teach all of her students bullet points, less words, get to the point. Don't write a huge long paragraph, forget it. And she would mark people down for that kind of stuff. And that's how we do it in the business world, is just less is more. Get to the point and get on with things. And that does contrast with the stuff in the South, where people are really written English in the Southern world is people like to the point, bullet points. But when you're talking with people, it's still very slow. It's still very relationship based, and that's still there, but it's not. And if that makes any sense.
So on that point, these days, where does the North end and the South begin? Is it North Carolina, or is it more north than that? Is it Virginia?
It's called the Mason-Dixon line.
Yeah, but where is that again exactly for the people who are not in the States and might not know what
basically from Kentucky south. Well, what you do is you drive south. The second they start to serve you sweet tea, you're in the South.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about the role of sales reps in the United States as well, and why it is so important to include them in your US sales plan, because I feel as though a lot of companies in Australia do not understand the really key role that this layer of sales reps play in the United States. And so they often don't have them or engage with them or include them in their US strategy. And so it's a key reason that they don't get the traction they're looking for.
It's because distributors don't do anything. Especially in the United States, and I would say it's a global phenomenon, but it's much more pronounced here, where because again, everybody's been spoiled. Where U.S. companies here typically have reps that work for the company that sell to end users, and they also sell to and push at and manage the distributors as well, and to manage the distributor reps as well. And because of that, distributors in general don't spend a lot of time pushing products, especially if they're complex products. They're just there to write orders. And as much as we would love to work with them and that they sell the product and do a really good job, they just don't. That's just the reality of it. And every company in the United States especially is responsible for building their own business, pushing their own sales, doing their own marketing campaigns to the end user and through distributors. You got to do it all over the place. And if you don't have that layer of rep involvement, then your revenue is going to be a lot less because distributors just aren't going to do a whole lot. They'll sell for you, but just not at the level that'll really get you to where you want to go sales wise.
So let's talk about how that rep structure works. Should people employ reps as employees? Are reps entirely independent? You contract them. How should that look in your view?
Depends on the industry. It's good to have one or two, or however many that makes the most sense, dedicated sales reps, because no one's going to sell your product as much as a dedicated rep. As long as you have enough business to support that rep, that's the hardest part, is that the revenue has to be there and the opportunity and potential has to be there for that rep to basically pay for themselves. If the numbers work, that's where you want to start. And then the other avenue is using independent sales reps. But the thing is with independent reps is they are little distributors all on their own. And so they all have their own portfolio of products that they sell. And if your product fits in with their portfolio in a symbiotic way, then it can work out really well. But then you have to then be there real time to give them support, content, collateral, marketing material, so that they can go out, and also training to go out and sell the product and support them in that way. And again, you have to have somebody on the ground to manage those reps, and then work with them and do ride-alongs and all that kind of stuff. So really, either a territory manager that does sales at the same time as well, but there has to be someone here locally that's actively managing independent reps, distributors, or dedicated reps. That's just how it has to be. And
so for companies that are starting out in the States, what do you recommend? I mean, obviously it's going to depend on the industry to a degree, but have you got some general advice for people about how they should set that sales structure up? When they're going to the market for the first time, they've just set up their office in the States. Where should they start?
Yeah, if it's setting up for the first time, it comes down to the business and the potential. And it's chicken or the egg situation, like with most things. But with all things that begin, you have to build the chicken and the egg at the same time. So the people that you hire starting any company are going to be different than the people that are going to be running it a couple years later. So you have to almost think about the territory managers, the reps that you hire, or the individuals that you use, that you work with to build your business initially, are a different animal. It's more important that they understand where your product is coming from, where your culture is coming from, and they can be an advocate and a advocate, or more so just a translator of all of that, to help you hyper localize the product and the strategy, but also help communicate that to the home office so that the home office can learn and be able to do that and educate both sides, and then also drive sales, hire reps or independent reps or dedicated reps. And that's going to be a more expensive individual potentially, or more skilled initially. But you have to have that because it's so complicated to settle that stuff. Like starting a business, it's just, they have to be flexible, they have to be knowledgeable, they have to have a lot of stuff that to allow you to basically learn and pivot. You're going to be doing a lot of that. Hopefully they'll stay on. Sometimes they won't. And once you get the structure set up, then in structure and the systems set up and the systems, if they work well, then you can start hiring people in that are just more local. So you don't have to be so hyper specialized in terms of being able to deal with the international stuff. They can just focus on the US market, and then it becomes more domestic and it functions more like a normal US quote unquote company. But that's the key, is you got to find the right person to help you set that up initially.
So if you're new and you're going into the US and you have to do that and then hire a bunch of sales reps, how do you go about doing that? What do you recommend that people do?
Slowly, because those reps have to pay for themselves. Like the opportunity has to be there and the support has to be there. So you have to, number one, if you don't have really good recruiting skills in your company, or if you don't have access to really good either recruiters or people who are really good at interviewing people to weed out the people that won't work well for your company, you got to find them. Because finding the right people initially will make or break your company, or will make or break either making $1 million or $20 million. Really, it's that getting that initial structure set up, and finding the people and managing them is going to be really important. But yeah, and then once you find an individual, support them, get them up and running, successful, and more important, paying for themselves. And then so the numbers have to work. So you don't get overloaded, and you don't basically, you increase your expenses to the point where you can't hack it anymore, and so you have to leave the market because it just doesn't work. Just piece by piece by piece, and slower than faster.
So thinking about some foreign companies that that have done well at selling in the US, are there key things that you can think of that they've done that set them apart from other people who just do so? Less
is more. If you try to take on too many regions, too many things at the same time, you'll fail almost every time. Focus, like we were talking about before. Take a region, master that region. Take a certain area of the business, master that area of the business. You have to have a beachhead. You have to have a place where you can put your stake into the ground and call your own and own it, and then build out from there. Because if you spread yourself too thin, you're done.
It's really good advice. Zach, we've been talking about how important it is that you get the right people for your team in the US. So a further question on that, what are the mechanics of actually doing that? How do you go about making sure you have the right people on the team?
Well, you get help early. You find people that know more than you do early. And you just identify your strategic components. So where do you see your opportunities? Where do you see your risks? Where do you see your difficulties? And you try to find people that can help you with all these components. And you can, there's a lot to be said for bootstrapping, but if you start to trip a little bit, if you're not working as well as you want it to, call somebody, find somebody, and bring in an expert to help you make the decisions to find the right people, or when you find the right people, how to manage those people, and find the right content, find the right marketing, whatever you've identified that to be.
Zach, it's been awesome having you on the show today. Thank you so much for coming in via Zoom from Chicago. Have you got any final thoughts for companies from everywhere around the world that are looking at the US and thinking about selling there and wondering whether they're brave enough to get started? What would you say?
Do your research. If anything, do your research, talk to the right people, and test market. You got to find some places to see if the value is there, and if it's as good as what you think it's going to be, and then be real honest with yourself. And if it works really well, great. Again, baby steps to see if it's going to keep going. But if you make inroads and you run into a lot of roadblocks and it's early on in the game, stop and recalibrate, rethink. And if you got to take some time to rethink everything before you go back in, do that. It's better to hit the pause early, because later on it becomes more expensive to do that.
That's fantastic. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Great. Thanks so much.
Hi, everyone. This is Maher again. And just a few things before you head off. Firstly, if you feel you have gained valuable insights from the show, make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss another episode. More importantly, don't forget to tell your fellow entrepreneur and business leader friends that this is the best podcast to tune into if they're looking to take on the world with their products and services. Also, if you are loving the podcast, please take the time to rate and review, as it's one of the best ways for us to get loads of free value into the hands of other entrepreneurs. And lastly, make sure to visit dearinassociates.com. That's DEARIN associates.com, where we have plenty of free resources and tools for you to get clarity and build momentum with your international venture. If you go there, you'll find the blueprint to international success, ebooks, our latest blog posts, and more. So be sure to check it out. And until next time, this is me encouraging you to expand your vision and wishing you all the best as you continue your global journey.